The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her rifle scope for the third time. She had been lying in the same position for over 4 hours, watching the valley below through her sniper's lens. The mission seemed routine enough. Provide overwatch for her squad as they moved through the dangerous mountain pass that connected 2 villages in Afghanistan. Maria had grown up in a small town in Texas, where her father taught her to shoot when she was just 8 years old. Back then, she never imagined those weekend hunting trips would prepare her for moments like this. The military had refined her natural talent, turning her into one of the most accurate marksmen in her unit. Her fellow soldiers often joked that she could hit a coin from a mile away. But Maria knew that in war, precision meant the difference between her friends coming home alive or in body bags. The radio crackled softly in her ear. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team. We're approaching the village entrance. Keep your eyes open for any movement on the ridge lines." The voice belonged to Corporal James Mitchell, her squad leader and closest friend in the unit. They had served together for 2 years and Maria trusted him with her life. "Copy that, Alpha Team. Ridge lines are clear. You have a green light to proceed," Maria whispered into her radio, her eyes never leaving the scope. She watched as 5 figures moved carefully along the dusty path below, their gear catching the morning light. Each man down there was someone she cared about. Rodriguez with his terrible jokes, Thompson who showed everyone pictures of his newborn daughter, Williams who could fix any broken equipment with just a paperclip and determination. The village appeared empty, which should have been the first warning sign. In this part of Afghanistan, villages were never completely empty during daylight hours. There should have been children playing, women hanging laundry, men working in the small gardens. Instead, the place looked like a ghost town, with doors closed and windows shuttered tight. Maria shifted slightly, feeling the strain in her muscles from staying motionless for so long. Her position on the hillside gave her a perfect view of the entire valley, but it also made her vulnerable if enemy fighters discovered her location. She had camouflaged herself carefully among the rocks and sparse vegetation, but she knew that a skilled tracker could still find her if they knew where to look. Through her scope, she watched her squad approach the first building in the village. The structure was made of mud bricks and looked like it could collapse at any moment. Mitchell raised his hand, signaling for the team to halt while he checked for signs of danger. Maria held her breath, feeling the familiar tension that came before potential combat. That's when she noticed the reflection from a window on the second floor of a building across the square. It was just a brief flash like sunlight hitting a piece of glass or metal, but it was enough to make her heart rate spike. Someone was watching her squad and they were trying to stay hidden. Alpha Team, possible contact in the 2-story building, northwest corner of the square, second floor window, Maria reported, keeping her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Mitchell's response was immediate. "Copy, Overwatch. We see the building. Rodriguez, Thompson, take the back entrance. Williams, you're with me on the front." Maria watched as her teammates moved into position, their training evident in every step. They had practiced this scenario dozens of times, but real combat was always different from exercises. The stakes were higher, the consequences permanent. As the squad prepared to enter the building, Maria noticed something that made her blood run cold. In a small alley between 2 houses, she caught a glimpse of movement. A figure in dark clothing was positioning what looked like a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, aiming directly at her squad's position. "RPG, northwest alley between the blue door and the well," Maria shouted into her radio, but she was already adjusting her aim. The distance was approximately 800 meters. Not an impossible shot for someone of her skill level, but she had to account for wind speed, elevation, and the fact that her target was partially concealed. Her training took over and time seemed to slow down. Maria controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat steady as she lined up the shot. Through her scope, she could see the enemy fighter adjusting his own weapon, preparing to fire the RPG that would likely kill or seriously injure her entire squad. The crosshairs settled on the target's center mass. Maria held her breath and gently squeezed the trigger, feeling the familiar recoil of her rifle. The bullet traveled across the valley in less than a second, but to Maria it felt like an eternity. She watched through her scope as the enemy fighter suddenly jerked backward and disappeared from view. The RPG clattered to the ground without being fired, its deadly payload now harmless. Maria allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction before refocusing on her squad's safety. "Target down," she reported. "Continue with the building clearance." But her relief was short-lived. As her squad moved toward the two-story building, Maria noticed more movement in other parts of the village. What had seemed like an empty settlement was actually crawling with hidden fighters. Her squad was walking into a carefully planned ambush, and she was too far away to provide effective support against multiple targets. The radio erupted with gunfire and shouted commands as the ambush began. Maria watched helplessly as muzzle flashes appeared from windows and doorways throughout the village. Her friends were pinned down, taking cover behind whatever they could find while enemy bullets kicked up dust around their positions. She began engaging targets as fast as she could acquire them, but there were too many enemies and they were too spread out. For every fighter she eliminated, 2 more seemed to take his place. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Maria realized that her squad needed immediate backup, or they wouldn't survive the next few minutes. That's when she saw the most terrifying sight of the entire engagement. In a building at the far end of the village, someone was setting up what appeared to be a large explosive device. If that bomb detonated while her squad was trapped in the village center, none of them would survive the blast. Maria's mind raced as she calculated the distance to the building where the explosive was being prepared. Nearly 200 meters, far beyond the effective range for a precise shot, especially with the wind picking up and dust swirling through the valley. But she had to try something. Her squad was trapped, and conventional backup was at least 20 minutes away. Through her scope, she could see Mitchell and his team taking heavy fire from at least 6 different positions. They had found cover behind an overturned cart and some concrete barriers, but their ammunition wouldn't last forever. Rodriguez was already signaling that he was running low, and Thompson appeared to be wounded, clutching his left shoulder while still returning fire. The enemy fighters seemed well coordinated, suggesting this wasn't a random encounter but a planned operation. They had obviously been waiting for an American patrol to enter the village, and Maria's squad had walked directly into their trap. The thought made her angry, but she channeled that emotion into focus. Anger could be useful if controlled properly. She took aim at the building with the explosive device, knowing that even if she missed the person preparing the bomb, she might be able to damage the device itself or at least disrupt their plans. The shot would require every bit of skill she had developed over years of training and combat experience. Just as she was about to fire, a new voice crackled over the radio. "All units, this is Eagle Eye. We have eyes on your position and are tracking multiple enemy combatants. Calling in air support, but you need to hold your position for 15 minutes. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. Maria could see that her squad's position was becoming more desperate by the second. Williams was down behind the cart, and she couldn't tell if he was injured or just taking cover. The enemy fire was intensifying, and she could see fighters moving to flank her teammates' position. She made a decision that went against everything she had been taught about sniper operations. Instead of staying in her concealed position and providing long-range support, Maria began packing her equipment. If her squad was going to survive, she needed to get closer to the action where her rifle could be more effective. Moving down the hillside while carrying a sniper rifle in full combat gear was treacherous work. The terrain was loose rock and shifting dirt that could easily cause a fall, and she had to be careful not to expose herself to enemy observation. Every few steps she paused to check on her squad's situation through her scope. The journey down the hillside took precious minutes that her friends didn't have. By the time Maria reached a new position about 600 meters from the village, she could see that the situation had grown even worse. The enemy fighters had managed to surround her squad's position on 3 sides, and they were closing in for what looked like a final assault. From her new position, Maria had a much better angle on several enemy positions that had been hidden from her original location. She quickly set up her rifle and began engaging targets systematically. Her first shot took down a fighter who was preparing to throw a grenade at her squad's position. The second eliminated someone who was trying to set up a machine gun on a rooftop. But for every enemy she neutralized, the situation seemed to generate new problems. The fighters were communicating with each other, adjusting their tactics in response to her presence. They had figured out approximately where she was shooting from, and some of them began directing fire in her direction. Bullets started hitting the rocks around Maria's position, sending sharp fragments flying through the air. One piece of stone cut across her cheek, drawing blood, but she ignored the pain and continued engaging targets. Her squad's lives depended on her ability to keep the enemy fighters from overwhelming their position. Through her radio, she could hear Mitchell coordinating his team's defense, but his voice was strained and she could tell he was struggling to maintain control of the situation. "Overwatch, we need immediate support on our eastern flank. They're trying to get behind us." Maria shifted her aim to the eastern side of the village, where she could see 3 fighters moving between buildings in an attempt to circle around her squad's position. The range was about 400 meters, well within her capabilities, but the targets were moving fast and using cover effectively. She took down the first fighter as he crossed an open space between 2 buildings. The second man immediately dove for cover, but he chose a position that was visible from Maria's angle. Her bullet found him before he could fully conceal himself. The third fighter, seeing what had happened to his companions, retreated back the way he had come. "Eastern approach is clear," Maria reported. "Already scanning for new threats." That's when the explosion happened. The blast came from the building where she had originally seen someone preparing the large explosive device. Either the bomb had been detonated deliberately, or something had gone wrong during its preparation. But the result was devastating. The entire building collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris, and the shockwave shattered windows throughout the village. For a moment, the gunfire stopped as everyone processed what had just occurred. Then Maria realized with growing horror that the explosion had created a new problem. The blast had knocked down several walls and created new lines of sight that the enemy fighters could use to target her squad from previously protected angles. Worse yet, the explosion seemed to be a signal for reinforcements. Maria could see new fighters emerging from buildings throughout the village, some carrying weapons she hadn't seen before. Her squad was now facing at least 20 enemy combatants, and their defensive position was no longer adequate protection. "Alpha Team, you need to move now," Maria shouted into her radio. "The explosion has compromised your cover. Head for the stone building to your north." She watched as Mitchell made the difficult decision to leave their current position. Moving under fire was one of the most dangerous things an infantry squad could do, but staying put meant certain death. Maria provided covering fire as her teammates ran across the open ground, her rifle barking repeatedly as she engaged any enemy fighter who tried to target them during the movement. Rodriguez stumbled halfway across the square, and for a terrifying moment Maria thought he had been hit. But he regained his footing and continued running, reaching the relative safety of the stone building just as enemy bullets began chipping away at the wall where he had been standing. The new position was better protected, but also more isolated. Maria realized that her squad was now trapped in a building with limited exits, surrounded by a growing number of enemy fighters who seemed determined to prevent their escape. The stone building where her squad had taken refuge was centuries old, built to withstand harsh weather and time, but Maria wasn't sure how well it would hold up against modern weapons and explosives. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from the windows as her teammates returned fire, but she also noticed that the enemy fighters were bringing up heavier weapons. "Overwatch, we've got wounded in here." Mitchell's voice came through the radio, tight with stress. "Thompson took one in the leg and Williams is unconscious. We need medical evacuation as soon as possible." Maria's heart sank. With 2 men down, her squad's fighting capability was severely reduced. They had gone from 5 effective soldiers to 3, while facing an enemy force that seemed to be growing larger by the minute. The odds were becoming impossible. She adjusted her position to get a better view of the building where her squad was trapped. The structure had thick walls and small windows, which provided good protection but also limited their ability to see threats approaching from different directions. It was a defensive position that could easily become a tomb if the enemy managed to surround it completely. From her elevated position, Maria could see the enemy fighters organizing themselves into coordinated groups. This wasn't the work of untrained insurgents. These people knew military tactics and were implementing them effectively. They were setting up overlapping fields of fire to prevent her squad from escaping, while positioning assault teams to attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The radio crackled again, this time with a different voice. "Alpha Team, this is Eagle Eye. Air support is inbound, but we need you to mark your position with smoke and get as far away from enemy positions as possible. Danger close warning is in effect." Maria knew what that meant. The incoming airstrike would be powerful enough to eliminate the enemy threat, but it would also be devastating to anyone caught too close to the impact zone. Her squad needed to get out of that building and away from the village center before the bombs started falling. Alpha Team, you need to move to Extraction Point Charlie. Maria transmitted. It's about 300 meters north of your current position, past the small hill. I'll provide covering fire for your movement. Negative, Overwatch, Mitchell responded. We can't move Thompson and Williams that distance under fire. We're staying put. Maria felt a surge of frustration. She understood Mitchell's reluctance to leave wounded teammates behind, but staying in the building meant certain death when the airstrike arrived. There had to be another option, but she was running out of ideas and time. That's when she noticed something that changed everything. In her focus on the immediate tactical situation, she had missed a crucial detail about the village layout. There was an old irrigation ditch that ran from near the stone building to a position beyond the extraction point. If her squad could reach that ditch, they could use it for concealed movement to get away from the danger zone. The problem was that the entrance to the ditch was about 50 meters from the building, across completely open ground that was covered by enemy fire from multiple positions. It would be a desperate gamble, but it might be their only chance of survival. Maria began planning the most complex shooting sequence of her career. She would need to eliminate or suppress at least 6 different enemy positions simultaneously to give her squad a chance to reach the ditch. It would require rapid target acquisition, precise shooting, and perfect timing. Even with all her skill and experience, the chances of success were slim. She started by identifying the most dangerous enemy positions, those with the best angles on the path her squad would need to take to reach the ditch. A machine gun nest on a rooftop, a sniper position in a second-story window, and several rifle positions behind garden walls. Each represented a lethal threat to her teammates. Alpha Team, I'm going to give you a window of opportunity in 60 seconds, Maria transmitted. When I start shooting, you move fast and don't stop until you reach the irrigation ditch north of your position. Thompson and Williams will need to be carried. Understood, Overwatch. We'll be ready. Maria took a deep breath and began her preparations. She had enough ammunition for about 15 accurate shots before she would need to reload, which meant every bullet had to count. There would be no second chances and no room for error. She started with the machine gun position, knowing that weapon posed the greatest threat to her squad's movement. The range was about 450 meters, with a slight crosswind that she compensated for automatically. The gunner was partially concealed behind sandbags, but Maria could see enough of his profile to make the shot. Her rifle cracked, and through the scope she watched the enemy gunner collapse backward. Before the other fighters could react, she had already shifted to her second target, the sniper in the window. Another shot, another confirmed hit. Now the enemy was aware of her renewed activity and began directing fire toward her position. But Maria ignored the bullets whining past her and continued engaging targets. Her third shot eliminated a fighter who was trying to set up a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Her fourth took down someone who was coordinating the assault teams. Go, 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 she shouted into her radio while continuing to fire. Through her peripheral vision, she could see her squad emerging from the building. Mitchell and Rodriguez carrying Thompson, while Williams stumbled along with support from another teammate. The enemy fighters realized what was happening and intensified their fire. But Maria's suppressive shooting was keeping most of them pinned down. She watched her teammates running across the dangerous open ground. Knowing that each step could be their last, Rodriguez stumbled under Thompson's weight, and for a heart-stopping moment both men were exposed in the middle of the square. Maria immediately shifted her fire to eliminate a fighter who was taking aim at them, her bullet arriving just as the enemy's finger was tightening on his trigger. Her squad reached the irrigation ditch just as Maria's ammunition ran out. She quickly reloaded, knowing that the enemy would use this brief lull to reposition and possibly pursue her teammates. But when she looked through her scope again, she realized that something had gone terribly wrong. The ditch that was supposed to provide concealed movement to the extraction point had been damaged by recent rains. What should have been a covered route was now just a shallow depression that offered minimal protection. Her squad was still exposed, and they were now too far from any solid cover to retreat. Worse yet, the enemy fighters had figured out where her teammates were hiding and were moving to surround the ditch. Maria could see at least 8 combatants approaching from different directions, and her squad had no way to defend against an attack from multiple sides. Maria realized she had to make an impossible choice. Her current position gave her good visibility of the battlefield, but she was too far away to provide effective close support for her trapped squad. The enemy fighters were closing in on the damaged irrigation ditch, and her teammates had very little time before they would be overrun. Without hesitation, she abandoned her sniper's nest and began moving toward the village. Every instinct told her this was suicide, a lone soldier approaching a fortified enemy position. But her friends were going to die if she didn't act. She kept her rifle ready while moving as quickly as possible across the rocky terrain. The sound of gunfire from the ditch area was intensifying, which meant her squad was engaged in close combat with the approaching enemy fighters. Maria could hear Mitchell's voice on the radio, calling out target positions and coordinating what defense they could manage from their compromised position. As she got closer to the village, Maria could see the tactical situation more clearly. The enemy had split into 3 groups to attack the ditch from different angles, but they had also left their previous positions less defended. She might be able to use this to her advantage if she could get close enough. She reached a position about 200 meters from the ditch, just as the first enemy assault began. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from inside the shallow depression where her squad was trapped, but she could also see enemy fighters advancing from positions her teammates couldn't observe. Maria's first shot eliminated a fighter who was about to throw a grenade into the ditch. Her second took down someone who was trying to flank her squad's position. But her shooting also revealed her new location to the enemy, and soon bullets were impacting the rocks around her position. She had to keep moving to avoid being pinned down, but moving meant she couldn't provide continuous covering fire for her squad. It was an impossible situation that required split-second decisions and perfect execution. The radio suddenly erupted with urgent transmissions. Air support inbound. 60 seconds to impact. All friendly forces need to be at least 500 meters from target coordinates. Maria looked at her squad's position and realized they were still well within the danger zone, even if they started moving immediately. Thompson and Williams couldn't cover that distance in time. The airstrike that was supposed to save them would end up killing them instead. "Abort the airstrike," Maria shouted into her radio. "Friendly forces are still in the danger zone." "Negative, Overwatch. Strike cannot be aborted. Aircraft are already committed to the attack run." Maria felt time slowing down as the full scope of the disaster became clear. Her squad was trapped in a position they couldn't leave quickly enough, surrounded by enemy fighters with friendly aircraft about to drop bombs on their location. In less than 60 seconds, everyone she cared about would be dead. That's when she noticed something that offered a desperate possibility. About 400 meters from the ditch, there was a small concrete building that looked like it might be strong enough to provide protection from the airstrike's blast effects. If her squad could reach that building and take cover inside, they might survive the bombing. But getting there would require crossing open ground under heavy enemy fire, carrying 2 wounded men, with less than a minute available. It seemed impossible, but it was their only chance. "Alpha Team, new plan," Maria transmitted while engaging another enemy fighter. "Concrete building, 400 meters northwest of your position. You have 50 seconds to get there before the bombs drop." She watched as Mitchell assessed the situation and made the command decision to attempt the desperate move. Her teammates emerged from the ditch, once again carrying their wounded comrades, and began running across the open ground toward the concrete building. Maria shifted her fire to provide maximum support for their movement. She had about 20 rounds left, which meant she had to make every shot count. She systematically engaged any enemy fighter who tried to target her moving squad, working from the most dangerous threats down to targets of opportunity. Her shooting was the best of her career, born from desperation and the knowledge that missing even one important target could mean death for her friends. Enemy fighters fell one after another as her bullets found their marks. But there were still too many of them and her ammunition was running dangerously low. Rodriguez stumbled again under Thompson's weight, and this time both men went down hard. Maria could see that Thompson was unconscious and possibly worse, while Rodriguez was struggling to get back to his feet. They were still 200 meters from the concrete building with less than 30 seconds remaining. Williams, despite his own injuries, turned back to help Rodriguez with Thompson's dead weight. Mitchell and the remaining squad member provided covering fire while the evacuation continued. But Maria could see enemy fighters moving to cut off their route to the building. She had 8 bullets left and at least 6 targets that posed immediate threats to her squad's survival. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. She didn't have enough ammunition to eliminate all the threats, which meant some enemy fighters would have clear shots at her teammates. Maria made a decision that went against everything she had been taught about ammunition conservation. Instead of trying to pick the most important targets, she began firing rapidly at any enemy position from which muzzle flashes were visible. Her goal wasn't necessarily to hit every target, but to suppress their fire long enough for her squad to reach safety. Her rifle clicked empty just as her teammates reached the concrete building. She watched them disappear inside with seconds to spare. But she also realized that her own position was now hopeless. She was out of ammunition, surrounded by enemy fighters who knew her location, and the airstrike was about to begin. The sound of approaching aircraft filled the air, growing louder by the second. Maria looked around for any possible shelter, but her position on the rocky hillside offered no protection from the massive bombs that were about to explode in the valley below. She had saved her squad, but there was nowhere for her to run. The concrete building was too far away, and even if she could reach it, her presence might compromise her teammates' safety. She was going to have to face the incoming airstrike with no protection, except the rocks around her current position. The first bomb hit the village center with devastating force. Even from 300 meters away, the blast wave knocked Maria to the ground and filled the air with dust and debris. Her ears were ringing, and she could taste blood in her mouth. But she was still alive and conscious. More explosions followed as the aircraft systematically destroyed every building in the village where enemy fighters had been positioned. The sound was beyond anything Maria had ever experienced, like thunder that went on forever, accompanied by the crash of collapsing structures and the whine of metal fragments cutting through the air. When the bombing finally stopped, Maria found herself lying face down among the rocks covered in dust and small pieces of debris. Her entire body ached, and she could feel warm blood trickling from cuts on her arms and face. The silence that followed the explosions was almost as shocking as the noise had been. She struggled to sit up, checking herself for serious injuries. Her left shoulder was badly bruised, probably from being thrown against a rock by one of the blast waves, and her hearing was still affected by the tremendous noise. But she was alive, which seemed impossible given how close she had been to the explosions. Maria reached for her radio with shaking hands. "Alpha Team, this is Overwatch. Report your status." The silence that followed her transmission made her heart sink. Either her radio had been damaged in the bombing, or her squad hadn't survived the airstrike despite reaching the concrete building. She tried the transmission again, speaking louder in case her equipment was malfunctioning. "Alpha Team, please respond. This is Overwatch requesting immediate status report." Finally, Mitchell's voice came through the static, weak but unmistakably alive. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team. We're banged up but operational. Thompson is stable and Williams is conscious again. How are you still alive out there?" The relief Maria felt was overwhelming. Her squad had survived, which meant all the risks she had taken and all the impossible shots she had made were worth it. But their situation was still dangerous. The airstrike had eliminated the immediate enemy threat, but they were all injured and far from friendly forces. "I'm mobile and mostly intact," Maria replied, getting slowly to her feet. "What's your status on movement?" "We can move, but Thompson needs a stretcher. The building protected us from the worst of it, but the roof partially collapsed. We're lucky to be breathing." Maria looked across the devastated village and realized they faced a new problem. The airstrike had been so thorough that it had destroyed most of the recognizable landmarks. Finding the safest route to the extraction point would be difficult when everything looked like a pile of rubble. She began moving carefully toward the concrete building where her squad was sheltering, testing each step to make sure the ground was stable. The bombing had changed the terrain significantly, creating new obstacles and eliminating others. What had been a clear path was now blocked by debris, while new routes had opened up where buildings once stood. The journey to reach her squad took nearly an hour because she had to navigate around unstable rubble, piles, and avoid areas where unexploded ordnance might be hidden. When she finally reached the concrete building, she found her teammates in better condition than she had expected. Thompson was conscious and alert, though his leg wound had reopened during the bombing and needed immediate attention. Williams had a concussion but was able to walk with assistance. Rodriguez had twisted his ankle during one of their desperate runs but was still functional. Mitchell appeared to be the least injured of the group, with only minor cuts and bruises. "We need to get to the extraction point before dark," Mitchell said as Maria examined Thompson's wound. "But I'm not sure how we're going to carry Thompson across all this debris." Maria looked around the ruined village and had an idea. There might be materials here we can use to build a makeshift stretcher. Some of these buildings had metal doors or wooden beams that could work. They spent the next hour searching through the rubble for usable materials, staying alert for any signs that enemy fighters might have survived the bombing. Maria found 2 metal poles that had been part of a fence, while Rodriguez located a piece of canvas that was large enough to support a person's weight. Working together, they constructed a basic stretcher that would allow 2 people to carry Thompson while leaving their hands free to use weapons if necessary. It wasn't comfortable, but it would serve their purpose for the journey to the extraction point. As they prepared to leave the village, Maria realized she had a serious problem. Her sniper rifle had been damaged during the airstrike, with the scope cracked and the barrel potentially bent. She could still fire the weapon, but her accuracy would be severely compromised. For someone whose specialty was precision shooting, this was almost like losing an arm. "We'll find you a replacement weapon when we get back to base," Mitchell assured her. But Maria knew that it would take weeks to properly zero a new rifle and develop the familiarity needed for long-range shooting. The journey to the extraction point proved to be even more challenging than they had anticipated. The bombing had created a landscape of craters and debris piles that forced them to take long detours around impassable areas. What should have been a 30-minute walk stretched into a 3-hour ordeal. William stumbled several times due to his concussion, requiring frequent rest stops. Thompson's condition remained stable, but carrying him across the rough terrain was exhausting work for the 2 soldiers who took turns with the stretcher. Maria found herself constantly scanning for threats, worried that enemy reinforcements might arrive before they could reach safety. When they finally reached the extraction point, a small clearing on a hillside about 2 kilometers from the village, they discovered that their problems were far from over. The radio equipment they needed to contact their base had been damaged, leaving them unable to call for evacuation. "How long before they send someone looking for us?" Rodriguez asked, settling down to rest his injured ankle. "Standard protocol is 24 hours for an overdue patrol," Mitchell replied. "But given what happened back there, they might start searching sooner." Maria wasn't comfortable waiting that long. Thompson needed medical attention that they couldn't provide in the field, and Williams's concussion could worsen without proper treatment. There had to be a way to signal their location or make contact with friendly forces. She remembered that her damaged rifle still had some functional components, including a mirror from the scope assembly that could be used for signaling. If any aircraft passed overhead during daylight hours, she might be able to attract their attention with reflected sunlight. As evening approached, Maria took the first watch while her teammates rested. The village below was completely dark with no signs of life among the ruins. The silence was almost complete except for the wind moving through the debris and the occasional sound of settling rubble. During her watch, Maria had time to think about everything that had happened. She had made decisions that day that would have been impossible to imagine during her training. She had abandoned her sniper's position, engaged enemies at close range, and somehow survived an airstrike that should have killed her. But more importantly, she had kept her squad alive through the worst combat situation any of them had ever faced. Thompson and Williams were both going to recover from their injuries, and the entire team would eventually make it home to their families. As she watched the stars appear in the clear Afghan sky, Maria realized that this experience had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she never knew existed, pushed far beyond what she thought were her limits, and found that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. Dawn brought both hope and a new challenge. Maria had successfully signaled a passing reconnaissance aircraft using the mirror from her damaged scope, and rescue helicopters were now inbound to their location. But during the night she had spotted movement in the valley below that suggested enemy forces were still active in the area. Through her cracked scope, Maria could see at least 3 vehicles moving along a road about 2 kilometers away. The distance made it impossible to determine exactly who they were, but their movement pattern suggested they were searching for something, possibly her squad. "Mitchell, we've got company," Maria whispered, not wanting to wake the others unnecessarily. 3 vehicles, possibly enemy, moving in a search pattern about 2 clicks south. Mitchell joined her at the observation point and studied the distant vehicles through binoculars. "Could be local civilians returning to check on the village, but we can't take that chance." "How long until the helicopters arrive?" 20 minutes, maybe less. The timing was going to be critical. If the approaching vehicles contained enemy fighters, they would likely reach the extraction point before the rescue helicopters arrived. Maria's squad was in no condition for another firefight, especially with Thompson still requiring evacuation and limited ammunition among the team. Maria made a decision that surprised even herself. I'm going to move to a forward position and set up an observation post. If those vehicles contain hostiles, I can delay them long enough for the helicopters to arrive. With a damaged rifle? Maria, that's suicide. She had already considered the odds and knew Mitchell was probably right. Her rifle's accuracy was compromised. She had very little ammunition remaining, and she would be facing unknown numbers of enemies with no backup. But it was the only way to ensure her squad's safety. The rifle can still fire, and I don't need perfect accuracy to discourage pursuit. Just give me 15 minutes to get into position. Before Mitchell could object further, Maria was moving down the hillside toward a rocky outcrop that would give her a clear view of the approaching vehicles. She carried her damaged rifle and the last of her ammunition, exactly 17 rounds that would have to be, enough for whatever was coming. The position she chose was about 800 meters from her squad's location and 200 meters from where the vehicles would pass if they continued on their current route. It wasn't ideal for sniping, but it would allow her to observe the enemy and potentially engage them if necessary. As the vehicles got closer, Maria could see through her cracked scope that they were military-style trucks carrying armed fighters. Her worst fears were confirmed. These were enemy reinforcements who had somehow survived the previous day's airstrike and were now searching for her squad. The lead vehicle stopped about 1,500 meters from Maria's position, and she watched as several fighters dismounted and began examining the ground with obvious skill. They were tracking her squad's movement from the village to the extraction point, and it was only a matter of time before they discovered the location. Maria checked her watch and realized the helicopters were still at least 10 minutes away. She had to do something to buy more time, even though engaging these enemies would reveal her position and bring overwhelming return fire. She aimed at the lead vehicle, knowing that even with her damaged scope, she could hit a target that large at this range. Her first shot punched through the engine block, causing steam to pour from under the hood. The vehicle was disabled. But more importantly, the enemy fighters now knew they were under observation. The fighters immediately took cover and began scanning the hillsides for the source of the shot. Maria could see them spreading out in a search pattern that would eventually lead them to her position. She had perhaps 5 minutes before they found her. Her second shot was aimed at one of the fighters who was directing the search. The range was extreme for her damaged rifle, and she wasn't sure if she had hit the target until she saw the others scramble for better cover. At minimum, she had gotten their attention. The remaining vehicles began moving again, but now they were advancing more cautiously and following a route that would take them directly toward the extraction point. Maria realized she had created a new problem. By engaging them, she had confirmed that American forces were in the area and provided direction for their search. She fired 3 more rounds at the vehicles, managing to hit one of them but failing to disable it completely. Her ammunition was running dangerously low, and she still hadn't solved the fundamental problem of enemy forces approaching her squad's location. That's when she heard the most beautiful sound of her military career, the distinctive whop 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 of approaching helicopters. 2 aircraft appeared over the ridgeline, flying low and fast toward the extraction point. But Maria realized they were about to fly directly into an ambush. The enemy fighters had positioned themselves to engage the helicopters as they landed, using the same tactics that had made helicopter operations so dangerous throughout the war. Maria could see at least 2 rocket-propelled grenade launchers being prepared, either of which could bring down a rescue aircraft. She had to make an impossible shot with a damaged rifle at maximum range while under fire from multiple enemies. The target was a fighter positioned behind a rock formation about 1,800 meters away, preparing to fire an RPG at the incoming helicopters. It was beyond the effective range of her weapon even under ideal conditions. Maria took her time with the shot, knowing it was probably her last chance to influence the outcome of the battle. She controlled her breathing, estimated the wind drift, and compensated for the damaged scope as best she could. The crosshairs settled on what she hoped was the target's center mass. The shot felt different from any she had taken before. Maybe it was the damaged rifle or the extreme range or the knowledge that everything depended on this single bullet. She watched through her scope as the projectile traveled across the valley, seeming to take forever to reach its destination. The enemy fighter suddenly jerked backward and disappeared behind the rocks, his RPG falling unfired to the ground. Maria couldn't tell if she had actually hit him or if he had simply taken cover, but the weapon was no longer a threat to the helicopters. The aircraft were now circling the extraction point, having spotted the enemy vehicles and realized the situation was hostile. Instead of landing immediately, they began engaging the enemy fighters with door-mounted machine guns, suppressing their positions while preparing for a combat extraction. Maria used her remaining ammunition to engage any enemy fighters who tried to target the helicopters, knowing that each shot from her damaged rifle might be the difference between success and disaster. She could see muzzle flashes from her squad's position as they joined the firefight, despite their injuries and limited ammunition. The battle lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. When the shooting finally stopped, the enemy vehicles were disabled and their fighters were either dead or had fled the area. The helicopters were able to land safely and begin evacuating the wounded. As Maria made her way back to the extraction point, she reflected on the series of impossible events that had led to their survival. She had made a shot at nearly 3,200 meters with a damaged rifle under combat conditions, something that should have been impossible but had somehow succeeded when it mattered most. Thompson and Williams were loaded onto the first helicopter, both conscious and stable. Rodriguez joined them, his ankle injury requiring medical attention. Mitchell waited for the second aircraft with Maria, both of them exhausted but alive. "That last shot," Mitchell said as they watched the first helicopter disappear over the mountains. "How did you even know where to aim?" Maria looked at her damaged rifle and shook her head. "I'm not sure I did know. Sometimes you just have to trust your training and hope for the best." As their helicopter lifted off from the Afghan mountainside, Maria looked down at the ruined village where everything had started less than 24 hours earlier. She had survived an explosion, saved her squad from an overwhelming enemy force, and made shots that would become legendary among military snipers. But more than that, she had discovered something about herself that she never could have learned in training or peacetime. When everything was on the line and the odds seemed impossible, she had found a way to succeed. That knowledge would stay with her for the rest of her life, a reminder that human beings are capable of extraordinary things when the situation demands it.